now call to order this Tuesday, September 19th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting at 6:02. Can we stand for flag salute?
Commissioner Party? Roll call.
Roll call.
Commissioner Party?
Here.
Commissioner Sarian?
Here.
Commissioner Finley?
I'm here.
Commissioner Accord?
Here.
Commissioner Kirby?
Here.
Commissioner Beck?
Yo.
Chair Higuera?
Here. Number 3 is the public comment period of the Planning Commission, and anyone that does not have has something to comment on that's not on the agenda, this is your opportunity to talk to us. This is something we don't respond to, you just...
Oh, that's fine, I just want to say that, since we're planning. I know last year, Gina, live over on Sisson, and last year that the city did a lot of work on the sidewalks and stuff, and they came down and spray painted all of our area, but nothing got done. So I didn't know if we were going to continue that, or if we just, city ran out of money, or what.
Like, you're asking a question, we don't respond
I'm
to
just
this.
putting that out there.
No.
Juliana can sometimes.
That's just a comment, and she, it can be...
I guess I'm addressing to see if the city is going to continue with the sidewalk
The Planning
work.
Commission has no knowledge of what this is about, the plans are. So if you...
Well, I'm just bringing it to your
Yeah,
attention.
yeah, you can call the city. That's what I would do.
Awesome, I will. Thank you.
Mhm. Number 4 are meeting minutes, and tonight is an incredibly special occasion.
Auspicious occasion.
We're all here. Gang's all here.
First, we need an approval of the minutes of the January 17th, 2017 meeting, and we will have success tonight.
Oh, I would like
Any
to...
corrections?
Really?
Or no? Okay, so...
I'd like to move to approve as submitted.
I'll second that.
So those that can be in favor,
Who
which...
was I there? Who was there?
That would be Commissioners Party, Finling, Accord, and Chair Higuera.
All of us who approve of that? Aye.
Aye.
Finally,
You got that?
Yes.
Before the
Oh,
year is
good,
out.
'cause
9 months later.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we'll go to B of the meeting minutes, and that's the approval of the meeting minutes of July 15th, 2017. Do I have any corrections on that? Do I have a motion?
Sure, I can move to approve these as submitted as well.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I am abstaining because I wasn't here. Melanie moved and Paul seconded, and
Thank
I
you.
abstained while everyone else approved. Okay, here we go. Number 5, the cannabis industry zoning amendment.
Please be patient with me tonight. We're still working on the sound equipment, so I'm trying not to make it go nuts right now. So if I have to get up and do that, apologize. So this is going to be, believe the third or fourth time the Planning Commission has reviewed the proposed cannabis package, which includes the zoning, retail licenses, and cannabis industry licenses. We're going to start with each ordinance one at a time, so we'll start with the zoning amendment. So the zoning amendment can be found on beginning on page 16 of your packets, and so that's going through. We made no substantial changes at the last Planning Commission meeting. One of the points that I did bring to the table was based off of information I've been hearing from individuals who are interested in cannabis industry, is that it is difficult to find appropriate parcels, and we're curious if we were going to open up any other zoning options. And it came into And then it came to my attention, so the 600-foot buffer from schools is a state mandate. And so on page 15 of your packets, I provided you with a map. I apologize for not bringing a bigger one. It's sitting on my desk that I printed for you. And so one of the issues we came up with, if you see Ream Avenue towards the southern part of the city, there is a school by definition in the middle of that employment center, which takes out quite a bit of the possible properties for cannabis industry. In addition, you see the other schools in a line through the downtown area. So that's why we brought up the question of if we would like to open up more zoning in the C1 area and then add the provision that cannabis industry and cannabis retail licenses cannot be in the downtown enhancement area, which was a major concern. I know that was brought up previously. We could do that. But it's up to the purview of the Planning Commission if you feel that the ordinance is adequate to move forward to the City Council.
Okay, Commissioners, I'm going to start with Paul, if you would have comment about this. And this is, I guess, this is to change and allow it in C1, more in C1?
It's just a thought for you guys to process if that's
Or not.
something. Yeah, or not.
So, my view on that, so Juliana, would that be conditional use for those areas, or would it, how does that work?
It can be up to you. So right now, the way that we have the zoning table, which is on page 17 of the packet, we have C1 is conditional use permit for type 1 cultivators up to 5,000 square feet. Retail licenses are permitted as a right by use. And then manufacturing, both types are conditional use permits in C1. And then testing laboratory is a conditional permit in C1.
Okay, thank you. I would definitely be for that, not because I want to have an industry that explodes all over our town, but because of, seems like everywhere there's a good place to have this, there's a school or something that prevents us. And we can't go into this with our arms tied behind our back. We certainly, I'm not for the wild, wild west either. I'm somewhere, I heard your concerns at the last meeting about that, and I get that. But in order for this to be effective and do us any good, broaden our tax base, bring more dollars in so we can fix the streets that need fixing, we need these things to happen so we can generate the income. And I don't think we're going to see a flood of people coming in where there's going to be 100 people waiting in line to do this, because most of the areas that we have that are available, they're going to have to build from the ground up. I had suggested, the Spring Hill area is a good area. Juliana informed me there's no infrastructure, but for the time being, we can certainly, you can get power out there, we know that, so approved septic and wells can be done until such time as we have the funds to bring infrastructure out there, and then mandate that these businesses hook up when such time occurs. So I would be in support of, at least for the time being, expanding the zoning so we could at least have some sort of success, because right now there's just seems to be, with what we're, with the C2 and EC, there just aren't enough opportunities. I mean, almost zero. So it's like, it's almost a why bother thing on our part if we're not going to avail people of the opportunity. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, Josh, do you have anything to say?
No, not right now.
Emily?
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with Paul. I do think that we've already listened to complaints about having it in the C1 areas, in the downtown district specifically, and a lot of our business owners have talked about how there's C2 areas that they're in, they're there. So, I mean, I have no problem with it being in C2, and like Paul mentioned, the Spring Hill area, there's a lot of area there, there's no infrastructure there yet, but that's fine. But moving it into C1, I think we're going to start seeing complaints, and I just think, no, I'm not interested in that, but it's not all up to me.
Melanie?
Well then, what about the suggestion that C1 excluding the downtown enhancement district? So that seems that it adds a few more parcels where it's possible, and yet we keep them out of the downtown area, which I think has been a recurring concern.
shopping center. Is that what it would really add?
It was South Mount Shasta Boulevard.
And
See that?
well, South Mount Shasta is C2.
No, it's right down here.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah, okay, I see that. Thank you.
So that's something to chew on.
Just
That would be
for-
that would be the
Yeah.
direction I would lean.
I would agree.
Okay, so we have a little
I-
agreement
that-
with nothing to.
I like what my teammates are saying, so.
Okay. Tucson?
And, yeah, I would agree with Melanie on that, because I was gonna say, you know, it depends where in C1, and if we can exclude the downtown area, I would be for that, and it just kind of opens up a little bit more possibility. It's not right downtown.
Alan?
I generally agree with what was said there also, as a conditional permit, not just as
Not just a permit.
not just as permitted use by right. At least that would be my general feeling,
For retail?
except for retail, which I think could be just permitted. That's my feeling.
Take that right out.
Except for retail.
So it's a little bit of a combination.
So what's there excluding downtown?
Instead of NP,
And I-
it would be CP under C1?
So for the record of the commission, so we do have C1 as a conditional use permit, which would mean it's a case-by-case basis that would be brought to you guys. So how you have it set right now, you would have discretion over each one, but what you could do is you could add the language of the one line of saying, you know, downtown enhancement district is strictly prohibited. Which would then, any conditional use permit coming to you, you have some discretion as far as making sure that it's cohesive with the surrounding neighborhood.
But there's still a couple areas like nursery and transport.
Right,
Which
Yeah.
could very well be suited
I think so.
down the southern end of Mount
Southern,
Shasta
yeah.
Boulevard.
Mhm.
So those could be, they're NP now, they could be CP,
I agree, yeah.
Which ones in C1?
nursery.
The lower
trans-
three,
Nursery, transporter,
Oh, I see.
and actually warehouse distributor. I mean, in some ways, I don't know whether we don't have that anywhere. Maybe I don't care about that so much, but I mean, it could be some of those NPs could be CPs
I don't,
if we're not having it in the downtown,
I'm not,
Yeah, I agree.
opening it
I
up a
don't-
little bit.
I would allow the warehousing piece. I don't know if that's a real problem.
Say that again.
I would allow the warehousing piece too within C1.
Yeah.
We have a
As a
warehouse in
condition.
C1 now, in the downtown district.
Which is what, please?
The Pepsi distributing
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's,
on Chestnut?
you're right.
Oh,
Pepsi
okay.
is an industrial use.
Okay, so, if we just make it mostly CP, except for the dispensary, which is already a P. Does that work?
Would you like to also include the type 2 5,001 to 10,000 square feet as a CP as well, which is the larger grow facility?
Yes.
So you want,
Okay.
okay.
Is it yes?
Well,
You have the type 1 as a
5,000 square
CP
feet,
already,
that's the
would you like?
size of this is
Yeah.
about 5,000
is there
square
any
feet
place
here.
that they could even do that in the C1?
I don't think there's
district?
anything down there.
Yeah, there's not.
This is 35? Oh, says the real estate smart pants.
Yeah, I think the only buildings that I could think of that would cause an issue because one of the individuals interested in a cannabis license was looking at the old thrift store that's across the street from Pepsi, but that would be excluded if you added the language of the downtown district is expressly prohibited.
I think that maybe 5,000 to 10,000 may be a little bit big. I mean, that's a.
For
that's a-
that zoning
Yeah,
area.
Yeah, for that
there's
zone.
no place really
I mean,
for
it would be
anything
nice
like
to encourage people to, especially for manufacturing or something that's not retail, to think of outside of the box. Maybe they should develop something somewhere else, you know, maybe encourage that because.
Hotel Row or Motel Row.
Well, yeah,
Spring Hill
any of
Road.
the EC stuff, you know, I mean, it could be that maybe they have to build themselves something
Or off of Ween?
for that big a
Well,
building.
off of Ream,
There's a
except for
school.
the area right behind Ray's is negated by that school across from,
Yeah,
It looks like
By
almost
General
all of-
Produce.
all of
Right, the
Rain.
IM school, but that's, if we go with the 600-foot, the map that Juliana made us,
Yeah, kitty-cornered from the storage units would work along the
Some
highway.
of it, some of it,
Right.
well,
Or
most
that
of it
Michael,
is.
City limits.
or that Michael Early
You would have to
property.
do quite a bit of parcel mapping in that area because those are some fairly large parcels, and the way that the state regulation is worded is that even if it goes over one portion of the property, that property's out. So for example, the Best Western property is that large C2, that's only one parcel right now, but they have the ability to go in and do a parcel map and start to sell that off if they want to do that. So it might encourage some people to break up some bigger lots, which might be helpful in the long run for us.
Okay, so.
I think a use like that,
Back to the C1.
I think a use like that in that specific area would be a good one.
Okay, and that's C2 already, so if they parcel mapped, it would pretty much stay C2 unless they wanted to do a rezoning. So that would already be a permitted use for type 1 and type 2 cultivation.
The only reason it's out right now is because of the school.
Correct.
But if they subletted it, or
Subdivided. There you go.
Subletting?
Sorry, it's been a
Sublet
day.
that platform.
If they subdivided, that would shrink, that circle would shrink.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay, so what I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that on the C1, if we do a CP on all of those except the 5 to 10,000 foot, which still stays as not permitted in our C1 zones,
So,
except for the downtown,
so CP to nurseries and CP to transporter.
and distributor.
So the only one the only two that you're keeping are the personal gardens and the type 2 as a not permitted.
Yes, I think that that's what it seems to be, folks, if everybody gives me a little eyeball look.
Personal garden not permitted in
It's not
those
permitted
zoning
now.
areas?
Correct.
And any commercial.
Yeah,
What happens if somebody happens to have a residence in that zone, though?
Yeah, we had talked about that one. We did install provisions on page 21, the personal garden tags, we did install setbacks into that personal garden tag that would work if you wanted to open up those zones for personal gardens. But basically the same thing too is if you had a commercial facility, it would allow for that personal garden as long as they're in the setbacks that you set.
Yeah, I just wouldn't want to eliminate somebody's access because they happen to live in
The wrong zone.
the wrong
Wait,
zone.
Yeah,
But-
I'm not understanding this. So if you live in the commercial zone, you can't have a personal garden.
Correct, that's how it's listed right
I
now.
think, am I correct in now that the storage units across the street on Ream, that's not city property? at
That
this
is
time?
county.
Okay, so, but in a situation like that, where something was like right across the street, but it was a house, it's been there for 30 years, maybe the people have lived there indefinitely,
so,
just wouldn't want to see them excluded just because of that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, we had talked about this point, I believe,
okay,
two
it's
meetings.
looking like I'm getting an agreement on that one too.
Yeah, I agree.
So we can make that a
CP.
CP.
Yeah.
So everything's CP except the dispensary.
So would you like to also make the personal garden conditional use permit for C2 as well?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes,
And then do you want to just do it for EC as well? But there's really not too many cases of homes in the employment center zone. There's maybe one or two that I can think of.
I think we should just do it
We should
across the
still go
board.
Just
ahead
do it
and
across.
across the board, yeah.
okay, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
In the personal garden,
Yes.
Correct.
Right.
but not for the 5,000, it's permitted, never mind, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so, C1, it's a CP for everything except a retail dispensary.
You did want to put the type 2 as a conditional use permit for
Well,
cultivation?
No, we did. I thought we did.
We did?
Two, I thought we're in an MP, we changed it to CP.
Oh, did we? I don't, I got confused.
Wait,
Okay.
Here, why don't I read what I got? So, type 1 is a conditional use permit under C1. Type 2 is not permitted under C1. Personal garden is a conditional use permit. Retail dispensary is permitted in C1. Warehousing is conditional use permit. Manufacturing, both types, is conditional use permit. Nursery, both types, is conditional use permit. Laboratory space, conditional use permit. And then freight transportation, conditional use permit.
right? You all agree on that?
Yes.
Okay,
But we were wondering about buildings, existing buildings that were between 5 and 10,000
I think
square.
we decided they needed to be the ones that were gonna go and develop some of these other properties.
Encourage subdivision, got it.
And then in the personal garden, it's CP all the way across for the C2, EC, and PD?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
And
Where-
C1, we did C,
Yeah, that one she, yeah,
Yep.
she read us
okay,
that one.
okay, got it.
Okay, so that, I guess it's CP for everything except the ones that it's permitted.
And the-
Yeah, so it's straight across the board for personal gardens. Okay, is there more, or Juliana, you were talking to us, I think.
I'm just trying to make sure, okay, and then the other point that we haven't, I'm pretty sure I heard consensus of, but would you like me to add in section 18.91.030 land use table, would you like me to add,
Where are we?
I don't-
Page, could we have a page?
16?
16?
Page 16 of your packets. The last sentence is, if a zoning district in Title 18 is not listed in the land use table in this section, then the use is expressly prohibited, including the downtown enhancement district.
Including,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, so I'll add that as well. Okay, I think that's all of the notes that I had with your questions. Just for review's sake, again, I'm just gonna go to the personal garden tags, because we covered that briefly at the end, last meeting. So to address the issues we were coming up with following the setbacks of the zone, John Kenny, the city attorney, just recommended we have our own setbacks, which so basically now it reads, all personal gardens must be located out of public view and meet the following setbacks: rear 10 feet, side 5 feet on each side, front personal gardens prohibited in front of buildings and in public view. Does that seem flexible enough?
My concern, I agree with that, but my concern is that some of those lots are pretty small, and there are personal gardens currently in existence. And in order to have them completely out of public view, I know of one personally that's hidden behind somebody's garage. I think the 5 foot from the side, was it, and 10 feet from the back, is that what you said? I don't think they meet the 10 foot from the back line, but they meet the 5 foot from the side. But
Are they
because
on
it's
an alley?
behind the garage, it's better back there. So I don't want to hamstring somebody, and they've had their garden there with the knowledge of Parish Cross now for 4 or 5 years that I'm aware of.
So is this, what is their back fence line backing onto? Is it another
It-
person's
it-
yard, or is
No,
it an
well,
alley?
it's that area where you make a right turn at, where the Mount Shasta, that mini mall where the Mount Shasta Ski Park has its office, and then you make the right turn and it curls back all the way back around. That's what
So
that
it
backs
backs
up
on
to.
commercial?
So it's called
No, this is back by the IM school.
No,
No.
Down by
It's
the
on
look.
On the other side of the
Where
street?
Ski Park has
Ski
its,
Park,
Court? I think
by
it's
the
court.
wool place.
By the,
Yeah, that's where the IM school is back
Oh.
there.
Yeah,
well,
Siskiyou
no, the
Avenue.
IM school I thought was across,
The IAMR school is on Siskiyou Avenue, so when you take a right where you're talking about, it's a very inconspicuous building. It's very
Oh, okay.
difficult to find, actually.
because how long has that been there? that school?
Okay, let's move on.
it's been a
though.
while, but anyway.
Because what
Well,
I'm
anyway,
trying to figure out is.
I do know of a garden in that vicinity. I don't want to disclose exactly where it is for,
Right, but I'm wondering if they,
I don't think
sometimes
they're going to be able to satisfy
you
the,
could be behind a garage and it backs on an alley, and then that's not
no,
interfering with
it's
anything,
that, it's that
backs
vacant
on a
area
rental
behind
unit.
there.
I mean, this is gonna
Off
be
of Siskiyou
complaint
Avenue.
driven anyway. I mean, someone would have to complain more than likely for the police to come down and measure.
Right.
in terms of
Next to
complaints
neighbors.
and using the ordinance to determine what would be allowed in a complaint, the blanket statement of out of public view can be misused. You know, we have a restriction on fence heights, we have setbacks established, we have things like that, but if somebody stands on top of their van, they're still in the public right of,
It's true.
You know, so I'd like there to be some sort of description that underpins the out of public view.
Like from a sidewalk or
Okay.
standing from the
So you would like to recommend to insert public view into the definitions, which is 18.91.040, and then explicitly state what that means?
We've all been in circumstances where the street is well above an adjacent residential property or something like that, and you're on a public way, but you're looking down over their 6-foot fence into their yard, private yard, and I could see somebody having their garden back there. I've seen this, and they have their plants back there. They're well within the required setbacks, but they're definitely within public view. I'm not sure of the best way to deal with that.
Yeah, I think the best way to deal with it is put public view into the definitions, and
Okay.
John Kenny was talking about public view has a very strict definition, so I
Okay.
can use the one that he recommends moving forward if you're comfortable with that. I'm not sure what the definition is that
That's
he
fine.
would, but I
Yeah.
can keep it in mind and bring it up to him to.
I
to
think
bring
I've read and I think I know what you're talking about, and I think we need that.
Okay.
So that doesn't address a situation that has, that people don't have the ability to have a setback?
So why 10 feet for the rear setback instead of 5, do you know?
Yeah, we modeled that off of, there were 2 other cities that did similar setbacks. I mean, you can feel free to amend those as you see fit, but the understanding is that 10 feet is a significant amount of space away from the back fence in case you are abutting a neighbor and that becomes an issue. The setback recommendations were basically based off of that, trying to be courteous to other neighbors.
Well, it would be the same, I know, my house, my neighbors are kind of closer on my side yards than my backyard.
That's with an accessory building, though. Those are the similar setbacks with an accessory building.
Yeah,
The backyard setback is further than the side yard setback. I support that myself, and I don't have a great logical reason why, but I support it.
The 10-foot one, you mean? Have you-
rear 10-foot setbacks are pretty much universal in our zoning code outside of the conditional, or, I'm sorry, not conditional, the
Right.
commercial.
Right, I know, but just in terms of if the goal is to not impose on your neighbor, then why are your back neighbors getting more consideration than your side neighbors, is what I'm saying. It seems arbitrary.
It can, yeah, if you want to change it, that's fine.
Well, we have our lots are deeper than they are wide, almost in every case.
No, not in the track.
Yes, they are.
Really?
And most of the time, they are narrow and long.
The
Well,
standard
backyard-
lot's 65 by
The backyard is
110.
where you have your barbecues and your patio and you hang out. You don't hang out in your side yards very often.
Well-
So I think that may be part of it, is that that's the area your neighbor is also socializing or hanging out
Well,
in.
but I see what Melanie's saying also. There are places in the track where it's like the houses are longer and they're set on the lot, so it's like your back space is just as big as your space side to side.
I think there's value to having consistency in our setback.
No, I agree
In
with
our enforcement of them. I think that there's value within the,
Because of the
Yeah.
proximity to the
Okay,
house.
so
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
gonna-
I'm fine
yeah.
with that.
Okay,
just
I'm gonna
checking.
take a poll because I'm a little unclear. Do we want to change the 10-foot to 5-foot? Alan?
no.
No.
No, I'm fine. It was explained.
Nobody wants to change
I'm
that
happy
setback,
with
except maybe Paul does, but,
Because
I'm not gonna
somebody could
argue.
ask for a variance, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah, we could probably do a case-by-case basis in that circumstance and work with people.
okay.
All right, we don't need to include that in the ordinance, though. That's just
So
something.
let's-
somebody-
Yeah, we can try and just be nice
So we're not going to
people.
change the setback, and, well, I don't know what the original part of this conversation was. Are we,
sorry about that.
I was just going through the personal garden tags just to highlight what had changed in there, just the setbacks. And then really none of the ordinance itself has been changed since then. It was the personal gardens, the zoning table, and opening up more zoning. Do you remember something else, Commissioner Fainling?
Well, I was just thinking, now that we've got our 600-foot map, do we need to also decide that that's what we want is 600 feet? Or have we?
So the state regulation is 600. You can become more restrictive, which means you can go up in the buffer length. That is up to you. You have that ability to add that buffer.
Yeah, I think 600 is a good
Okay, are we good with 600? All right. So that kind of completes our, and I can
Review.
open this up to the public, and I have on the sign-in sheet for number 5, item number 5, Yanni. No, what? Oh, so, and Elizabeth, neither one of you want to speak on this number 5, okay. Then, and does anybody else want to speak on number 5? It's the one, zoning, what we're,
Personal gardens.
Yep, just
Okay.
the zoning.
okay, so the public is not, okay, so I'm going to close the,
No,
it's the zoning. This is just zoning. And then there's 2 more coming up. So I'm going to close the public hearing part, public speaking part. And commissioners, it's come to my attention that we need to decide on each of these
individually.
individual recommendation, or zoning, or what are they? Ordinances, thank you. About how many, which is like, because I wasn't here last week, I'm a little struggling a little bit. How many licenses we're going to?
That'll be in the next items.
Next
Yep,
one, that's
that's
the
not-
zoning. The zoning's
correct.
fine.
Yep.
Okay. So,
You're good. I know, it's hard because you want to talk about all of them in the same realm.
okay, so then, what we need to do is have a motion, I guess, to
Can I-
send this,
Can I make a motion
you may.
to approve the ordinance as
Amended.
amended for personal gardens and
Here, I
C1.
can read the amendments.
and zoning?
And the downtown, right?
So the
C1 in
approved,
the downtown district,
the
yes.
recommended amendments as they stand right now is to amend the table as indicated by the planning commission, which I have, include the prohibition of all cannabis industry in the downtown enhancement district, and then finally, amend in public view definition as stated by city attorney.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It passes. Paul Beck moved and Alan Pardee seconded. All commissioners approved. Okay, here we go. Number
Great.
6, cannabis retail license and standards ordinance.
Okay, so this one should be pretty straightforward. I apologize, it looks like Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 got placed out of order. So the cannabis retail licenses is on page 31. And so the cannabis retail licenses are pretty straightforward to our current regulations. It does not increase the number of licenses that we are going to be offering. So a recommendation that you'll see on page 31 that I introduced last month is, as per city attorney notes, 5.70.030 was stricken because they have to follow state regulations anyway. He just figured it was easier to keep the exact numbers and section out for the restricted locations. In addition to that, the other subtraction was point D under 5.70.050 cannabis retail license, which was that, cannabis retail operations may sell, transfer, or assign. It was contradictory to what we said in a previous point, which is that you can't take your license with you. You have to reapply if you're moving locations. The other change that has happened was the striking D under 5.70.080 cannabis retail license application selection process, page 33. So we had discussed this at the last meeting about how to deal with outside companies coming into the area and not having the local industry be able to keep up with larger capital. The recommendation by the city attorney was just to strike the wait list option. We don't have to have a wait list option. So what the wait list had done previously is if someone applied for a retail license and there wasn't one available, they would be placed on a wait list. And then once one does become available, that wait list, they would be the first ones picked to apply for a license. The issue that was brought up at the last meeting was if someone is moving their retail from a small location to a larger location, they would then be second on the wait list. So it kind of contradicted, allowing the current industry to expand and possibly move different locations based off of growth of their business. Just to keep it simple, city attorney just recommended that we strike the wait list, and we struck the wait list in both license ordinances. It's just a little bit easier that way. And that continues on to page 34, which is just, again, striking that language. In addition to that, I don't think there were any other, the other substantial change that was requested at the last two meetings was deliveries, which can be found on page 37 of your packets. So originally, delivery was prohibited in the city of Mount Shasta, and the Planning Commission had requested language to allow deliveries for medical cannabis. And so you have letters A through D, which outline allowing cannabis retailers to be licensed. So I'm just going to run through them. So A, cannabis retailers licensed under this chapter may apply for registration to deliver medical cannabis within the city following registration with the City of Mount Shasta Police Department. Registration forms will be developed and that is a really fancy city attorney word, promulgated by the police department. Apparently it means promoted. I had to look that one up.
Put forth by.
Yes. So I also confirmed this with the City of Mount Shasta Police Department. The other option you had talked about was training standards. They want to collect the training standards in the application process. That's something that they want to have on hand. And then they were okay with setting up their own registration forms. In other cities, I took a look. Basically, people who are registered to be an employee have to get their live scans anyway, so we'll have the live scan of all drivers. They just have to come in, register their license plate with the police department, and then that way, within the police department system, if, for example, they get behind a car and they type in the license plate, it'll come up that they're an approved medical cannabis delivery driver before they pull them over for any reason. So that helps on their end. And I didn't want to add a lot of language to the registration forms because I want the police department to figure that out themselves and make it easier on them. So letter B after that, recreational cannabis and recreation cannabis product delivery is prohibited in the city of Mount Shasta. So in the future, if you do want to amend in to allow recreational delivery, which Seattle, some other larger metropolitan cities do allow that, you can just strike that if you'd like, but it makes sure that people are delivering just to medical cannabis users. C, no person shall deliver medical cannabis to any person or location within the city regardless of the origin of the medical cannabis except for medical cannabis transfers made to qualified patients by the qualified patient's primary caregiver, things like that. That's just some legal addition that John Kenny wanted us to put in. And then all delivery operations must comply with all city and state regulations. So just because you're a cannabis delivery driver doesn't mean you can violate the vehicle code and speed. That just helps put that in there for context. So that's the language that was recommended by the city attorney for deliveries, if you're comfortable with that. So it basically only allows the current 3 retail license holders to deliver medical cannabis. So no other company can come in and just be a delivery service. It would have to go through our retail licenses that we already have. So it's not opening up any other additions. After that, it was just some minor language additions.
Can we stay where you're at just for a second there?
Sure.
Are the distributors considered the primary caregiver? Is that, that's what it,
so I'm sorry, say again?
on C, except for medical cannabis transfers made to a qualified patient by the qualified patient's primary caregiver.
So a caregiver can go to a retail license or a dispensary and pick up their prescription for them.
So the dispensary itself can't deliver it to the...
It could. Yeah, so this does allow them to do that if they register with the city of Mount Shasta. But what this also says is that a primary caregiver who has a right to go and get that prescription now isn't considered a delivery driver. So it's trying to separate.
So this is in
the two.
addition to?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, so right now, if you're someone who has a primary caregiver, your primary caregiver can go to the location, pick up your script, and bring it back to you. It basically kind of separates the two. So that person can't become a delivery driver because they're not registered with the retail licenses, and the retail licenses are separate. So.
Go ahead.
I wondered, what about deliveries outside of the city limits?
I did talk to the city attorney about that. We can't regulate that. So we cannot go outside our jurisdictional boundaries and say you can deliver outside in Siskiyou County unless Siskiyou County is okay with delivery. So it's pretty much only within our city limits.
And how are they going to, when it becomes recreational marijuana, how is that going to be able to be transported? So if you're, you're manufacturing it over here and you want to take it to one of the storefronts, what is that one?
Sure. So there's we can think of it as like two different types of deliveries. So you have your industry delivery, which is your transporters. So those people in that designation of the table that's called a transporter, they're just going industry from industry. They're not delivering from industry to the patient or to the individual. Where then you get the delivery drivers who are just taking, so how they have to be packaged, following state regulation. Each dispensary has to package it a certain way with the script on the front, and then according to state regulation, those drivers can only have a certain amount of cannabis on them and a certain amount of prescriptions. I didn't want to start putting that language in here because I don't want us to monitor that much. They have a certain way they have to do it. So when you have the delivery driver, the dispensary will prepare it like a prescription with the thing on the front and say this is where it's delivered. And then transporters are just industry to industry.
Okay.
Does that help?
And that wouldn't take a special license or anything? It's just like somebody delivering produce to Berryville?
The transporter?
Yeah.
They would have to get the cannabis industry license.
Oh.
We don't have a maximum number of licenses for transporters, but they would still have to go through the licensing with the city.
So if you have 3 retail and then you have 6 other kinds of cannabis industry outside of that, there has to be enough transportation licenses out there?
Transporters, yes.
Transporters licenses for them to be able to do their business, so to speak.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And what happens? Yeah. And so
There are some state regulations that do allow
So
certain
there-
ones to deliver between industry, but we're just talking about the retail aspect.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so there's no, every single one of the cannabis industry license holders are not allowed to retail to the end user or an individual. They can
They're
transport,
wholesalers.
yeah, they're wholesale.
All right. Yeah, Melanie, do you have any more questions? Anybody have any more input on this particularly?
Maybe. So, are we also discussing?
Would you talk in the microphone?
I'm sorry, are we also discussing the actual retail licenses of the 3 dispensaries? Or is,
What do you mean? Can you elaborate?
we were talking about putting a time limit from the time that you applied to you opened your business.
Correct.
Is that part of this?
So if there's any new retail licenses, so the 3 that are out now are out. We can't subject them to new rules in this new ordinance, but say, for example, one of the retailers doesn't want to do retail anymore and they forego their license. Any new retail licenses that people apply for have 90 days to start operating after it's awarded by the
because my
city.
concern is right now there's 3 licenses that are out and one of them has been frozen and we haven't been enjoying any tax benefits from that for going on a year now, and it's not helping us and it's keeping somebody else out that would be opening and allowing us to benefit from that tax money.
We did amend in language to prevent that from happening in the future.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing, you said that we can't pass new regulations that affect existing businesses?
So the way that it works is once you have so we have some language in here to allow the current licenses to come in and renew after a certain amount of time, because this is going to be an interesting transition. It's a little different from other industries and other permit examples and processes because it's in such a transition with the state and we require them to produce a copy of their state licensing. We're going to kind of be in a limbo period. So for the next, I believe we put it in here, the next year to half a year, we're basically saying, you go get your state license and then come back to us and then we'll consider it renewed. We're not going to make them go through an application cycle again.
But the standards and regulations and rules.
Will apply to them once they get their new one from us.
Okay.
But we're going to wait until they provide their state copies.
Okay.
So it's just more in reference to the application and the time period between application and operation.
Okay. What do we need to do with this?
Public
Um,
comment?
Huh?
Public comment?
Public comment, thank you. This is, hang on. Oh, here it is. This is for license and standard ordinance and retail license and standards ordinance, and I'm going to open up that to public comment. If anyone wishes to comment on that, now is the time. And yes. Name and address, as you know.
Who am I? I don't know. Okay. Elizabeth Tabor, 1227 Mont Airport Road.
And
Could you
need to
try and
be
speak in?
really-
Loudly, please.
Hello.
There you go.
Just really quick on what Juliana just said. This is all the general provisions that have been put out from the state now in regarding to the new licensing coming in January. So all applicants that were in operation prior to January 2nd of 2018 may continue to operate while their application is pending with the state. If a completed applicant is received by the Bureau no later than 5 p.m. Pacific Time on July 2nd of 2018, the continuing operations are the same commercial cannabis activity as the license type of which the applicant is applying. If the applicant for licensure is denied, the applicant shall cease all commercial cannabis activities. Priority review will be given to applications that were in operation in good standing with the local jurisdiction by January 1st, 2016, and whose businesses and ownerships of those premises are currently the same on January 1 of 2016. Priority applications will be processed and reviewed. So basically, come January 2nd or before that July 2nd date when we submit our secondary applications with the state, they're expecting to be barraged with applications, and it could take anywhere from 8 to 9 months processing to get those back from the state. So there was some concerns that people were like, oh, we can't operate if we don't have our state license, but they will send you a letter acknowledging that you have applied, it's been received, and we can always turn that into our city planner and let them know that our additional licenses are there. They're calling medical M1 and R1, so existing storefront dispensaries can apply through the state to be able to dispense recreational and medical cannabis from an already storefront location. I'm glad you brought delivery back to the table because I was actually going to ask tonight to maybe do a 2-month study this year before the first of the year, keeping records and logs. AB 133 was just signed by the governor on Friday, which stipulates that delivery has to be from a storefront retailer. And there's specific standards that are posted there, the logs that you have to keep, how much you're allowed to transport, when, during business hours. And I printed out like a demo of the recorded log that you would have to keep. And I thought if the board was considering allowing this, that maybe for 2 months we could keep a record and really see if it's feasible for next year to even have that. So that was a kind of a question or something that I was going to bring about.
It seems to me that you were going to leave that in the hands of the police department.
Okay,
So it's not, because we don't need to,
so we can work with them.
yeah. Or
That's a great idea.
Or, yeah, so from
Okay.
that standpoint, that's over there where the people that enforce those kinds of laws anyway.
But we intend to have delivery
Yeah,
at this
we
point.
are doing the deliveries.
From tied to the storefront then. Okay, great.
All right.
Good to know. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeanette Greenhart. I'm a little confused on your delivery. Now, are you just talking about having a whole separate delivery business there at your location, or is it, hey, this is Maggie down the street. I'm really sick. I can't make it to the shop today. Can you bring me some medicine? As far as advertising, that we do delivery services versus just one of the patients one day not being able to make it in.
It seems
So-
to me that it sounded to me is that if you have somebody in your business that delivers to anybody, no matter
No.
what, then, or you cannot just go and take it to them. They,
Right.
however, could have a friend come pick up their prescription, it sounds like.
You cannot have a friend come and pick up your prescription, so it
No.
has to be someone
No,
from, yeah,
That's what I'm
someone,
talking about, the delivery.
Yeah,
is that
correct.
I don't want to advertise that Greenheart's delivering now. But if one of my patients do I still need to come in and sign up as a delivery if we're going
Correct.
to allow it? Not that I'm going to start doing delivery, but if one of my patients,
So that's what she's
Yeah.
saying, is
Yeah.
yes, you do have to
Okay.
register your, whoever it
okay,
is.
no worries.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak to us? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and move on to us,
Item 8, I think
Huh?
it is it 8?
we're on six.
yeah,
Number
6.
6. So, it's trying to figure out what I'm supposed to.
I did
Now-
not hear any proposed amendments or changes to the ordinance yet, so
Right.
unless there aren't any, you could probably vote on it.
Say that again, please.
I didn't hear or have any amendments to this, so.
Yes, I didn't hear anything either. Are we all good with what was presented to us in this particular
Yes.
meeting? I guess we could go.
Are we covering, I think you said that this section would cover what she brought up about the number of licenses?
That'll go back, that's the industry, so we're on
That's the
retail.
next one.
So, not yet.
Yeah,
Still one.
retail, we're staying with only 3 licenses at
We
this
will-
time.
So the next one, we get to finally
Yes.
do what I was,
The
don't
next
know
one's a
anything
fun
about.
one.
Okay, so commissioners, can I have a motion to approve the cannabis retail license and standards ordinance?
Sure, I'll move to approve as submitted
I'll second.
by staff.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Melanie moved, Paul seconded, and everyone approved. Okay, we go on to number 7,
All right.
cannabis
There
industry
you go.
license and standards ordinance.
This is a fun one. So, again, similar to the last ordinance, we struck the restricted locations as per city attorney recommendation, just because we don't want to have those specific state regs in there for the buffers. They have to meet them anyway. So the maximum number of licenses is something we've talked about for a little bit. There are 2 discussions that we've had. One is how to minimize monopolization of licenses, and the other discussion we've had is the total number of licenses we're going to be allowing for right now. I'm going to start with the monopolization point so that we can take them one at a time. So I talked to the city attorney, and he has some experience with he is the city attorney for a few other jurisdictions that are going over these, and I asked him about the monopolization factor, and then I gave a call to Shasta Lake Planning Department to see how their planning is going, and then I did also call into Eureka to see how it's going with them. So neither of them have a clause similar to the monopolizing one that we had, and the city attorney had recommended striking letter C, which is 1 business location can hold no more than 2 cannabis industry licenses. The licenses may not be the same type. The argument that the city attorney brought up was, he just said logically, he's like, 1 cultivator is not gonna grab 2 cultivation licenses for 1 business. It doesn't make sense to buy 2 permits for 1 business. And most of what they're seeing in other cities is they're not monopolizing those licenses in that way. So instead of putting more regulation in to try and do that, John Kenny just simply recommended we just strike that. Because the zoning, the available number of buildings, and the available number of buildable lots will kind of equal that out and prevent that from happening. So I haven't heard that from any, from the 2 cities, from Shasta Lake or Eureka, and Eureka's had theirs in place for a little while now, and then Shasta Lake's just recently put theirs into effect, and they're not seeing that trend happen.
So, and this is true with retail outlets in all of the different segments?
Yep.
They don't have restrictions on them?
Yeah.
We're still we just finished retail though, and we're still maintaining a 3 maximum with the retail outlets?
Yeah, just the retail licenses.
And we're doing that even though it's sounding like we don't need to?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
And we're doing that even though it sounds like research is saying we don't need to do that, or is?
They recommend having a maximum number of permits, but
Okay.
as far as restricting to the total number of permits per building,
Okay.
that's not happening in other places.
And do those other communities that you contacted, do they also have like a maximum of 3 retail outlets and things like that also?
Yep. Yeah, maximum numbers are pretty typical, but so for example, if a retail license holder also wants to have a product manufacturing license, they allow that to happen without maximizing those types of permits, if that makes sense. So we were talking about the vertical integration of cannabis in
Right.
one of the meetings. They allow that to happen as much as possible because they're not seeing people buy up licenses and sit on them.
To restrict other people? yeah.
Correct, and we already have the provision that Paul had brought up. The provision, the 90-day provision for operation is in the industry licenses as well. So if someone, for example, got 2 cultivation licenses for one building location, they would automatically lose one because they can't operate in the same amount of space, if that makes sense. Because you're just stacking them on top
Are
of
the
each other.
numbers in these other communities you talked to, they're based on population also? And is there a similar?
No. So I actually took the population recommendation out from our original discussion about the cannabis licenses. No one's really doing it by population. It's just basically what people are comfortable with as far as the total number of licenses. So they
Right.
don't have a logical conclusion, which is...
I just want 5.
Yep. So John Kenny did recommend language to put that in there. So the language that he had recommended, which is in Shasta Lakes, verbatim, and then Eureka has similar languages. Letter C of 5.80.030, the total number of industry license holders in operation shall be determined based on the number of locations which have been issued. And it continues there, so you basically can choose your number that you're comfortable with.
Okay, thank you.
So
Well,
that's...
actually, wait, if we do decide at some point for retail or for some of these others to increase the number that we allow, is that a rewrite of the ordinance, or how would that occur?
You would just amend, basically, our maximum number of permits for the industry, for example, is letter B. You would just amend letter B.
Okay.
And it would have to go through Planning Commission and City Council. But it's not a zoning amendment, so it doesn't have to have multiple readings and things like that.
Okay, great, thanks.
So that's the monopolization point. The other point for the maximum licenses we had been talking about is the total amount of licenses. So right now, we're still with the original, there will be no more than 5 of each license type for a total of 15 cannabis industry licenses to operate within the city limits. At the last meeting, it was discussed possibly bringing that down to 3 of each type for a total of 9. That is up to the discretion of the Planning Commission, and so I will leave that decision to what you guys feel comfortable with.
Okay.
Sorry, do you want to stay on that point, or you want me to continue
No,
through?
you finish this up and then we'll go back to that.
Okay, sounds good.
And I think I'm going to open it up for public hearings so that you all can get some input from everybody, and then we can talk about the number of licensees, because you kind of talked about it last time, I guess. And let's get some feedback back, and then we can do the next thing. Okay.
The only other changes is to page 26. We struck the wait list option again. And that's because of the same issue you guys have thought up as far as, if you have a local establishment that starts small, so for example, a cultivator wants to start with only 2,000 square feet, but then their business grows and they want to purchase a larger facility, that wait list gets rid of them having that permit taken away if they move. As far as other amendments, there was just some minor language that was added by the city attorney on page 30 and 29. Other than that, there really haven't been any substantial changes between the last 2 months and today, besides the striking of the wait list, striking of the restricted locations, and then the discussion about the maximum number of licenses.
Okay. So I am going, it'll be a little different this time because I'm going to open it up now for public comment. And if there's anybody that wants to speak to the, and it's, I think primarily what we're talking about, the number of licenses for the community, because we had some discussion of 3 or 5 of each type. That would be helpful if you have some input on that. Or if you have protest about the whole thing or anything like that, that's good too. So I'm opening up this to the public. If anybody would like to speak on the cannabis industry licenses and standards, now is the time. And name and address when you get up there.
Andrew Strack, 6104 Deer Creek Road. I'm not sure if I was following it correctly about the, talking about the cultivation licenses and not being able to have more than one type at one property. And since we're only allowing mixed light and indoor and on a small scale, it seems restrictive to not be able to have both the mixed light and an indoor at the same location.
No, that wasn't, I don't think that's what it was. It was like having two of the same exact kinds of like you're
Okay, but you can't, so you
monopolizing.
could have two separate ones.
Yeah.
You can still have the indoor and the mixed light at the same location?
I believe
I
so.
think
I
that
don't
all
know.
falls under one license, cultivator license.
Yeah, I think
No,
so.
the mixed light and the indoor are two separate
You
licenses.
could be a manufacturer and a grower.
So, to clarify,
Okay, do that,
yeah.
yes.
So our cultivation licenses are, we only allow indoor and or mixed light. So you would only get one license and it would be per square footage. So that's what we limit you on. So you wouldn't be able to come in and get type 1, which is 5,000 square feet or less, and a type 2 for one location, but you can do both indoor and mixed light.
At the same location?
Correct.
But
It's-
but you're still restricted to that total 10,000 square feet
Correct,
with them combined?
correct,
Okay. Okay.
yes.
It's just one permit, right?
It's one permit, and it's because we're basing ours on square footage. So you couldn't have two 10,000 square foot facilities on the same property because one, that would be a completely different license type at the state level, and two, that would be higher than the amount we're allowing for one cultivation location.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just before we have anyone else, can I just clarify that the three licensing types that we're discussing are food-based, non-volatile, and cultivating? Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, just.
Anyone else?
My name is Micah Dobush. I live at 1234 Nixon Road. And I work at Spring Hill Nursery. And I'm interested in creating a extension of the nursery to sell plants. Plants that people would take home and grow for medicine at that industrial and or for recreational. And I'm wondering how that fits into your zoning or your licensing process.
Sure. So retail to the end user, you wouldn't be able to do. But what you could do is you could do seeds and you could do starts under a nursery designation at the state level, or you could do cultivation. But what would happen is similar to the conversation we had before, you could only wholesale to one of our retail establishments in town to sell to the end user, if that makes sense.
So I couldn't be a nursery and sell my stock to public.
So the way that they clarify nursery for cannabis at the state level is they have on-site retail and off-site retail. And at the earlier stages, our ad hoc committee had designated that we don't want to do any on-site retail unless we open up more retail licenses, because that helps minimize the amount of opportunities some people have, especially youth, have to getting product. So what you could do is you could start that business, but you would have to sell to one of our retail license holders to sell to an end user.
While you're up here, can I ask some questions about this too?
Sure.
If I understand it correctly, as a non-expert in growing the plants, we would, and I wanted to grow my 6 plants, just getting seedlings from a place isn't exactly what we'd want. We'd want those to be, is the term vegged? Taken further
A
along.
seedling. It would be a seedling.
But it's not just a little guy.
Clone?
You might want to
They're
wait a
pretty
second
small.
just because the train's really loud.
It would be considered a seedling.
Because don't you sometimes just want to take it into flower?
No.
So our retail, for example, our retail
Some people do.
Our retail establishments at this time are allowed to sell clones and starts, and so that's basically what they would continue to do. So you would be allowed to get an industry license, and there's no maximum on nurseries. You would be able to do the seeds, and you would be able to sell starts and plants to the retailers to sell to the end users.
No.
That
That-
includes clones then?
Correct.
Are you defining starts as clones or starts as seedlings and,
It's the whole
Cuttings.
spectrum,
okay.
It's the whole spectrum.
Thank you.
Did that answer everything for you?
I'm not satisfied, but it answered my questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can see the challenge if you have a business that's like a nursery.
Well, we can always talk about changing that,
Yeah,
can't we?
yeah.
I mean, that's what we're
That's
doing here.
That's something totally, oh my gosh.
Why don't we finish public comment
Yeah.
and then we
Okay.
can talk
Okay.
about, okay.
Elizabeth Tabor. Okay, to clarify that, there is a difference between starting from a seed and getting a seedling or taking cuts from a mom that we would call clones. You can, yes, we can sell the larger, what we would call a teen, if someone wanted to just take it home and be able to flip it into flowering. So, yes. As far as what she's asking about her nursery location, the state defines a nursery because of our track and trace program. So every plant a nursery does has to have a UPC code when it was either germinated, when it was at a particular age, particular height, and that information is actually transferred with that plant to the retailer location that then is logged when we receive that plant, and then it's also logged upon when we sell that plant. So the state regulations on the CDFA website, they're all listed there for you, anyone that wants to get involved in nursery. So I call up, there's a Dark Heart nursery, they're amazing. So come the beginning of the year, all of their plants will be UPC code, they're tracked and traced to the retailer, and then from the retailer, obviously, to the particular patients. And that UPC code actually goes with the patient or with the teenage plant or the seedling plant, depending on what you're searching for. So even the plants are regulated as well as the cannabis and how we operate. So all those plants are traced.
What will happen with when it becomes recreational?
That is.
It's the same
It will
thing.
still-
It's the same thing, so
Because
if
you
they,
You
if.
say
wi-
medical, so I'm just.
Right, so if a recreational
Yeah.
user came in and wanted 6 plants, I
They're
have
still
6 plants
UPC'd.
that are all UPC'd. They're then, we
Okay.
even have to enter that recreational patient or person, that's gonna be a long time getting over that word, person into our system, and the state can actually track that UPC code to that individual.
Okay.
So, if I might, if I wanted to buy, I want to buy a few teenagers.
Okay.
Maybe they can help her on that.
I
You
think
meant
we need,
plants,
we need a
teenage
different,
plants,
we
to
need a different-
clarify that.
We need a different word for that. 6 teens. And I just assume that, okay, I just assume as a homeowner, and I want to buy my 6 plants, I can come to an outlet like this and buy those 6 plants. And when I plant them and have my out of public view garden, do I keep that UPAC number? Like,
I would, let's say the neighbor did complain, or they came
Gotcha.
by to check.
so
You
as
have
a
your
homeowner,
receipt and your UPC that
If-
those were bought, you didn't obtain them.
Proof
can
of
I
Some guy
obtain
on
them
the
in
street
some
corner.
way?
I'm
If I, as a
sorry?
homeowner, if I want to just, my
Yes.
cousin Joe grows really good plants, or something, you know, and I got those, can I grow those as a homeowner? Do I have to
Yeah.
have?
Sure.
Okay,
No, yeah, if you can be gifted right now, you can be gifted under AUMA, you could be gifted 28.5 grams of cannabis, you can have 8 grams of concentrate,
Isn't that
and you
if-
could be gifted plants right now. That happened November 9th.
I thought that
Correct.
was a medical, if you were medical.
No,
So, okay,
that's
there's no way.
recreation.
Wait.
okay, let me
Juliana,
clarify.
please.
Let's back it up. All right. Previously, you had to be a medical patient. As of November 1st in 2016, when they legalized recreational, you as an adult, you can consume, you can have on your person everything that Elizabeth is saying. But what you cannot do until January 1, 2018 is you cannot go in and buy it yourself.
Oh.
You can be gifted.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
So for example, you can't take it as like alcohol. Say they just changed alcohol, that it was, you know, you can't go in and buy that handle of rum right now, but you can wait until 2018. But if your buddy Bob has a handle of rum, he can gift that to you, and that's legal.
And can I have a still?
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
We'll talk about that later.
But yeah, so to clarify and come back to that, we're basically looking at the retail aspect of nurseries that we're taking away. So you can't just The way the state has set it up and how they want nurseries to operate is you can't just come onto a nursery and go, I want this plant. They have to go through the retail side. Now they, like I said, there are two different subsects of nursery, which is on-site retail or off-site retail. So if we wanted to open up more retail licenses and say, you know, if you did want to have a retail license and a nursery license, that's when you would get, you know, kind of the operation that Micah was discussing earlier. If that makes sense. So we decided to separate retail from the industry so that we would only have 3 retail points because it's much more controlled that way. But in the future, if you wanted to allow more retail licenses, you could open them up for nurseries to do it.
I have a question.
Okay, let me see.
Sorry.
About nurseries?
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the commission?
Quick question on the nursery point. Can you have a nursery license on a cultivation site, or does it have to be separate? And if you could have a nursery on that site, would it count against your square foot limit?
So the nursery is considered separate under the state regulations, so you would have to get a different state, but that would not be under the cultivation license.
And it could be on the same property?
Correct. You would need 2 licenses, though.
And you could use that nursery to veg the plants, and it would not count against your 10,000 square foot?
Correct. How they have it defined in the state, that is correct.
Okay, and that's how we have it here too?
Yeah,
Oh,
we follow the same
defer to state law?
definitions as the
But
state.
you have to
Stay here.
sell, you can only sell to a retail
Correct.
business in town, and you have to have the UPC and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, if I might, the
Correct.
term veg, is that becoming a teenager?
Veg is any marijuana flowers under a 12-hour cycle of darkness. Its flowering mechanism is the absence of light.
Right.
So any time that you are giving more than 12 hours of light to the plant, it's considered veg. So as soon as you deprive it of light, that is called flipping, and that's when it's flowering. And the state, I think, defines flowering as ½ inch of a pistil on a plant. That's the state's definition.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I have a question
Of whom?
of Juliana. So you just,
But, wait,
Yeah,
I would like to
Yeah.
close the public. Are
Did
we
you wanna
done
talk-
from, is the public?
yeah, you can, that's,
Now's the time.
Hello, thanks for your time. Ali Tagavi at 404 Old McLeod Road. Just wanted to comment about extraction and volatile and non-volatile again. I'm not sure where we stand on that currently.
so we did amend in, that's actually in the zoning amendment, is all of our definitions. It is in here.
As long as it's non-volatile, is that what we're
It
talking?
was added in the last version, and I have to find that definition. So we follow,
20?
okay. Yeah, so the non-volatile, so basically volatile under state regulation includes ethanol, butane. There were a few other ones in there, and so I believe the original question you had for us was if ethanol was or was not. Ethanol under the state regulations is a volatile chemical. So non-volatile manufacturing is concerned with water pressure, or water pressing, excuse me, and other pressurized methods. So it's not the use of any, so their definition of volatile is anything that under pressure or exposed to fire could produce a flame in a liquid or gas form.
Okay. So my question is, will I be able to extract with alcohol?
No, ethanol is considered a volatile chemical.
It's state regulations,
Yep.
which we are endeavoring to follow.
But is
Well, sorry, state does allow you to do volatile manufacturing, we just chose not to do volatile at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, is that anywhere in the city?
Yes, all volatile manufacturing is prohibited in the city.
Okay.
At this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I would
When
like
she
to
closes
close
it, you
the
can ask that.
public comment period, and I see no one else. Okay, thank you very much. It's closed, and commissioners,
Alan
now's
has
the
a question.
well, so did Emily.
Oh,
Emily
okay.
was
Go ahead,
actually ahead
Emily.
of
Go
Alan.
ahead,
Okay.
go ahead, it's okay.
Well, the volatile and non-volatile piece, I remember talking about it. Is the idea that that they can't do the volatile extraction safely? It's safety concerns is the issue, I'm assuming.
That was the original concern by the ad hoc committee, to not include volatile at this time, especially just due to the train running through the town and other safety hazards that we have that make us unique. Not that it couldn't be added in the future. I think the general thought right now was that if we felt more comfortable with that, we could add it in the future. But I believe it was the ad hoc committee's decision to stay with just non-volatile and food-based manufacturing.
Can I ask, it was safety concerns and things like that? And it wasn't felt that there may be certain zones within the city within which that could be done?
Hey, Paul, can you talk in your mic?
Sorry. Well, that's why we're here we arrived at that, and that's, now
Here we
we're
are.
talking about it, so if we can change it if you guys want to have that discussion, correct?
Correct.
I don't really know enough about it. I'm not at all an expert in it, but it seems like if we have demand,
Well, he did make a good point at one of the other meetings that with some of the tinctures they make, you have to extract with alcohol.
right?
But the problem, as I see it, is that alcohol, butane, and
I want to say it's hexane, but I can't remember what the
there's
other
one
one
other,
is.
they're all together, so it's, am I correct to say that if you allow one, you have to allow them all? And butane, I mean, not that long ago, there was
Yeah,
a big fire in Dunsmuir from a butane explosion. That's what we don't want to have. We don't want to have that, and we're trying to do this and minimize the minimize the
Likelihood.
failure
Risk.
of
So
this.
what if butane is not a food-grade product, but vodka is a food-grade product, and you could conceivably
Yes, you could, or even a
Tincture.
grapeseed oil, you can extract with grapeseed oil.
or butter, for that matter. If you melt butter, it can,
Are we talking extraction with heat, with flame? Because as an herbalist, an extraction with alcohol, there's no heat. You just put
It's pressure. It's pressure, and it can be pressure, heat, or any type of mechanical manipulation.
in a jar, there's no pressure.
yeah, I don't understand this.
So again, we're a little out of order. We don't
Yeah.
usually allow the audience to
Okay.
speak. So
So what I'm trying to figure out, because I know that tinctures aren't produced with heat, they're produced with soaking them, or some, not all, I don't know all of it, are produced by putting something in a bottle like,
There are certain methods that heat is applied, and that's where the danger exists.
it's a heat-
So this is why we're having this discussion, so we can change it if you guys want to. That's just how
yeah,
yeah,
it started
it's
out.
up to you.
because
My-
I know a lot of herbalists don't add heat because it takes away from the quality. The
Mhm.
heat changes the product
And
itself.
I don't really,
But I don't know
I'm
about.
not interested in the tinctures and things like that myself, but it seems like we have a number of uses in the city that do use all of our restaurants. Don't all of our restaurants use this
Propane,
sort of
things
thing?
like that.
And,
But it's cooking it this way rather than putting it in.
So,
I
so
mean,
the other concern with the volatile chemicals is it's not usually just heat that's applied, it's the pressure that's also
Right.
applied to it as
And
well.
if there's a leak in a line and that vapor travels to the flame,
so
if
it's,
you guys want to talk about allowing alcohol as extraction with no pressure or heat added, let's do it. I mean,
That's the definition of non-volatile
But
manufacturing.
I
that's-
also,
Is
so
that,
then-
Also, it's currently allowed.
so they could then use
Yeah, so you can do the
alcoholic, non-volatile,
you cannot use
non-volatile
alcohol
okay,
extraction.
as,
you
as
just
per,
can't use heat or flame.
correct,
Okay, so
or pressure.
and
then,
is
does that
the,
make everybody happy out
the
there?
idea that this is,
Okay.
less safe than a standard restaurant use
With heat,
with heat?
yes, heat or
Yes.
pressure, you
Yes.
bet.
It's less safe doing the
Oh, yeah.
type of extraction.
If you approach it under the wrong circumstances and you have a sweater on and you get a static spark off your sweater, there's a little rupture in the line that you can't see, you're going to have an explosion if you're using heat and/or pressure to extract.
Plus that, okay,
Gotcha.
plus that
I've-
restaurants have hoods that particularly deal with the problem of all
Yeah.
the stuff.
I guess
that-
all I'm getting at is it seems like there would be technological restrictions that we could put on this process that
But,
might.
but if there's, all I'm saying is if we have a passive alcohol soaking, no flame or heat or pressure, that is a way tinctures are made a lot of times, and that one's okay.
No.
No,
If it includes alcohol or ethanol, it is
Oh.
not okay under
I
our
thought you
current,
just said
sorry. Let's back up.
okay.
You can have volatile or non-volatile product manufacturing. It was decided to do the non-volatile because it avoids using the chemicals in the processes, and it also avoids having the chemicals stored on site. That was the original thought process of the ad hoc.
Plus, in such cases where these facilities are adjacent to residential areas, if you wanted to do something where if somebody built a facility, say on Spring Hill Road and wanted to do it, if it blows up, it's not gonna hurt anybody out there.
Well, no, I understand the reasoning from the standpoint of fire, or explosion, but I just am trying to figure out.
The reason why it's classified by the chemical that's used and not about heat or extraction is how the state has decided to define that.
Can I ask if the other communities that you checked in on, are we similarly following what they're doing? Or do they?
Shasta Lake does allow volatile product manufacturing. There are some regulations where you can take out just butane if you want. There is some language we can do that. Eureka, it depends on the zoning. So that's the other thing too, is if we do decide we want to do volatile manufacturing, you're going to have to amend the zoning amendment
Right.
that we just approved.
Yeah.
So what they do as well is volatile manufacturing is not necessarily allowed in the same zones as
Of course not.
non-volatile.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just thought if there was a mechanism if there's a demand for it, I just thought we should search for a way to.
I've had one interested party.
Okay.
So
For volatile.
Okay.
for volatile.
I may be wrong also, but I believe Shasta Lake, I don't know if these were legal sites, but they've had quite a few fires because of these volatile compounds.
Is that right?
Yes.
But again,
But it might have been the butane.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it absolutely could have been.
Given the conversation, in my opinion, right now, I'd like to stay with the restrictions. I just wanted to explore it a little bit.
Okay.
So the other thing too is if you do allow it, they still have to follow all state regulations, they have to follow all state inspections and things like that. So, I mean, they do still have to go by a high level of scrutiny, as would any other level of the cannabis industry.
So I have a question. So I know if you go into the natural food store and you get a tincture of some herbal tincture, it's often alcohol-based.
Usually, yes.
And I'm guessing that the tinctures that people are talking about are similarly processed. And it's sort of a similar product, except it's cannabis instead of, whatever, some other herb.
But where are
Correct.
those made? Where are they
Lavender.
manufactured?
Thank you. Lavender, a lavender tincture, say. So, I'm just curious if it's comparable, what kind of restrictions often apply to that industry? And are we treating them similarly? Are they equally dangerous? As a frame of reference, that would help me if anybody knows.
I don't have an answer for you, but if you
No, I
would
don't
like,
know either,
again,
because there are local people that make tinctures that sell them to Berryvale,
Yeah.
and I don't know what they go through to get those licenses or their permits or whatever, or
Not
maybe they don't.
sure. Yeah.
But,
What are the chances?
but I haven't heard of a lot of fires because of that, because I think it's a fairly passive mechanism.
Again,
Well,
if-
I would suspect that if they can't legally do that within like a residential zones or something like that, I would suspect.
You would need to get an occupational permit and a business permit, and most likely if it's going to be something that is consumed, it has to go through the Siskiyou County Health Department and go through health inspections and their food processing permits.
So it may be occurring in a residential district, but not legally.
Correct.
So, okay, so what I would, I'm going to ask you if this is possible. This is a whole nother thing we're talking about. I would kind of like to get this all moved forward and then maybe address the
Volatile.
tincture aspect separately when we have either more information or something, I mean, can that be done or not? Or is that even more work?
You can do whatever you think is right. Basically, what you would be asking is that we would pass this as a package to go forward with the caveat that volatile manufacturing be revisited, and then you set a time limit for that, when you would like to revisit that. If you want to immediately start revisiting it, I would suggest going back and rescinding the motions that you've done for the zoning amendment. So those are your options if you want to immediately start looking at those.
But we don't necessarily have to put a time limit on. I mean, in 3 years, 4 years, whatever, 2 years, there's more pressure, we can revisit it based on,
You can revisit it anytime you'd like.
Right,
I'm just
so-
saying, if you want to revisit it sooner rather than later, I would just recommend that you go back to item 5, I believe, which, yeah, I would
No,
go back
I
to,
don't want to do that.
okay.
I don't know whether anybody else wants to do that.
No.
I'd like to
So,
move this forward.
maybe a good compromise is to investigate language for volatile manufacturing in the next 6 months,
Yeah.
because then that way they're going through
Or
the
year.
process.
Yeah,
Well, I have a
mean, we've got
question
general
then.
plan here.
How important are tinctures to the cannabis?
Pretty important.
They are.
Yeah, volatile
Distribution.
manufacturing tends to be the most common,
Yeah, it's very important.
especially the ethanol aspect. When we were first talking about the ethanol, I didn't think they were gonna put it in the volatile category, but they did.
But again,
So.
I think Juliana already said that they, non-pressurized or with no additional heat, you can use.
No,
It's
she just
diff-
said, she told me
no,
no, can't do it at all.
difficult. It's not.
So
something-
anyway, I'd like to,
Is
I'd
that
like to
what you were not
suggest-
thinking? I'm just curious, I have other questions about, before we
Okay.
go on to the other piece, but when you were working as a subcommittee, were you operating under the assumption that you could still make tinctures, or I just was wondering how you got
There-
where you are.
Without heat or pressure.
But
Well,
were
you need
assuming-
heat and pressure.
Well, okay, but what I know is that you can stick cannabis in a jar with alcohol or grape seed oil, let it sit for a month, and you've got a tincture.
That's
Boom.
basically what we're,
And that's not pressurized or heated.
that's still using alcohol. So we're not talking about pressure and heat, pressure and heat are not the issue between volatile and non-volatile. What you're using to make it, so grapeseed oil would be fine. That would be a food-based manufacturing. But alcohol, under the definition of the California regulations, is a volatile
And
chemical.
is there a percentage or proof?
No, it just says
So that
ethanol.
you actually couldn't use vodka then to extract. And
Okay,
Correct.
so.
That's how they have
Yeah,
it
no,
separated.
And I realize that this is, I would like to move this and get this moved on and
Yes.
address this other issue later, because I totally understand the economic importance of being able to have tinctures,
Correct.
okay? But that's too much, and we won't get any of this
done.
done, and I would
Well, it'd
rather.
be one more meeting. It would just be one more meeting if we wanted to tackle it.
Maybe,
No.
I don't think.
Again, you'd have to rescind your vote for the zoning amendment.
Well, right, but we could do that tonight. And then the next, I mean, if it's important, I'm just saying, I'm not that attached to having it happen tonight, because if what we want to do, because we're going to be darn busy with the general plan. So if, I would rather get this done and get it done than push it off, personally. And I still have a question about nurseries before we leave the tincture part. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, guys, let
I'm
me
for
have a little
moving
poll on
forward.
how we feel about it, Paul.
I'm for moving forward and revisiting in
Josh?
6 months.
I'm kind of torn, actually.
Okay, that's a torn. Emily?
Move forward.
And you,
Move forward.
Melanie?
If we're gonna look at this in 6 months, I don't see why we wouldn't just do it in October.
Because
That's
we're hoping to
expecting a
have
lot
something
out
in
of our
place.
Well, we've been doing this, I mean, we've been making incremental changes every month, because I think we're doing, the process has been pretty thoughtful, and if it was just focused on one item, which would be how to tackle volatiles, it just seems like it would be one more meeting. I don't know if Juliana feels differently, but it would be one more meeting, I think.
Do you want to finish going down the line, or would you like me to
Yes.
answer that?
My thoughts are, if we're going to be giving out, a certain number of manufacturing permits. And a lot of the manufacturing requires alcohol. Then what's the point of even having those permits? So,
How about, can I recommend a compromise kind of between what's going on? If you're okay with it, and it's all,
We haven't heard from Ellen yet.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
He's torn,
I'm torn.
okay.
Sure,
And
I want to hear your,
would like,
because I want to hear your compromise.
sure.
yes,
So you've already approved the retail licenses, which we already allow. That's perfectly fine. I can take that to city council and we'll be ready to go by, the thing that we're running into is if we don't have local ordinances in place, it's gonna be a longer period of time for our local institutions to get state licenses. You know, that January 1 deadline's coming up, or January 2nd. So I'd like to get all of this done and in place by the end of the year. So a compromise could be to rescind the vote for the zoning amendment, not pass the industry licenses, and set a special meeting just to talk about that in 2 weeks.
to talk about what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it.
The volatile chemicals, and then do this in 1 to 2 weeks. You could hold a special meeting just on this topic to make sure it gets done in time, but it's up to the commission if you want to take that time to do that. I wouldn't schedule anything else for that meeting, so we would try and make it, up to your schedules how you want to do that.
So we would do the retail license would still hold.
We'll go forward to the city council.
We would rescind the zoning
Correct.
and obviously the industry license.
Would be tabled to a special meeting.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Alan, do you want to,
I think that the community, there's not enough demand for us to get this done in this particular round. I'd wait even a few years before we look at the volatiles. I think the downside's significant, and I'd say we move forward with what we have.
split? I think we're going to split. I personally think we should get this tincture one, special meeting for it, because I know how important it is to the industry. And it's also something probably that can be made wholesale and sent to other places, because it's a really big piece of this.
But can you make tinctures without volatile compounds?
You
With
can make
oils.
it with alcohol. You
With
don't have to
oil.
have butane,
Or
you don't have to
oil.
have
You
heat.
can use with oil.
But those aren't
It
the ones that are
doesn't work
really
as good.
selling. Those aren't the ones that are,
Yeah, the ones that sell are the ones that are made with brandy or vodka or whatever they use, because they feel like it gets into their system
The
better.
equivalent of moonshine, the stuff they sell in Oregon, I can't remember which
When
color.
I use an herbal
Grain
tincture, I
alcohol.
use alcohol because I have no problem with alcohol, and usually the ones that are made with glycerin or in herbal tinctures are for people that have alcoholic tendencies, and so they don't want to do any kind of alcohol. So, but if I want one that's effective, I do the alcohol, so, for herbal. So that's why I know how important it is, because in the herbal tincture business, that's one of the big ones, way better than pills.
So do you want me to answer any other, I know Commissioner Findling had a question about nurseries before you put it to a vote, as far as what you want to do.
Yes, okay. So what about nurseries, Melanie?
Well, I was just wondering, back to the question about having on-site nursery retail sales. It seems to me that we have kind of our concern about sort of public safety, teenager safety, not teenager plants, which I agreed is a horrible name for those plants, like human teenagers. The kind of security that's required for a nursery and how that drives our consideration of a retail nursery outlet. So what kind of security is required? Or is there a special security?
Correct. At the state level, they have a very specific security. You need certain types of fencing. You need the security cameras, the 24-hour, and I believe they have to keep up to 90 days of film for the security fencing. Has to be padlocked and things like that. There's a number of different ones if you want me to look up the specifics of the security.
No, I was just
It's
trying to get a sense
pretty
of sort of
expensive.
the hurdle that's required if, like, an existing, plant nursery wanted to take that on.
So I think the bigger infrastructure issue for that individual location would be the retail aspects. So similar to what was brought up in the public comment, you have to have the scanning, you have to have special retail regulations. You can't necessarily allow people in the main area of the nursery to be able to go into that area without an accompanying individual. So they'd have to follow the retail license regulations by the state if they're going to do on-site retail, which is pretty extensive.
So it would really be a separate business and it's like a separate entrance and a very separate
Correct.
operation. Okay, thank you, that helps.
I've changed my mind. I want to, if we're going to revisit, if there's enough of that to revisit later, I'm on board.
So that you're a yes, let's try and
Yes, let's
check
try
out
and
the
get the
tincture thing.
alcohol tincture thing happened.
Okay,
I'll
so
vote.
to revisit the volatile extraction, but basically the tincture, all those that would like to visit this and see if we can work something out, raise their hand.
If we do it, are we talking about doing it in 2 weeks?
Yep.
Okay, if that's what the people want, then
Okay, so we're gonna do that part.
Okay.
Do we address the licensing now to just get it out of the way, or do we wait till this?
Was that to reconsider the zoning amendment?
Well, no, the maximum number of licenses.
Oh, okay.
Do we want to do that tonight, or do we want to wait till the,
Why don't you wait until the
To the
next meeting,
special
since you're going to
Yeah.
revise it anyway, unless
Okay.
you want to really talk about it. It won't really sway, but you will need to have someone motion to reconsider the vote on item 5.
okay, so,
So I'd move to rescind our approval of item 5 and instead table it for our special meeting.
I second that.
who's thinking?
I-
Alan?
I have a quick question. So if we do
I
add.
think we're in the
Oh,
middle
sorry.
of a motion.
Oh,
But
sorry.
Can we do that?
question a motion?
Yes.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can
Can
have
I question,
discussion.
so if we, yeah, sorry, if we,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. If we add volatile after this meeting, I know this is all potentially going to happen, but would we then have another license? Would it be non-volatile product manufacturing and volatile product?
We would discuss that at the next meeting. If you did choose to do that, I would just get rid of the 3 separations and just say 1 manufacturing license, and you can determine how many you want for each one of those. So you would reduce the number of types of licenses to 2 types, which is cultivation and manufacturing.
Okay.
But,
Okay, thank you.
Unless you want to make a 4th, I mean, it's up to you guys if you want to do 2 or 4.
My only thought is won't there be people that aren't doing the stuff?
We would just consider it all manufacturing. Or you could do
But
the separate
I
ones.
want to really, through zoning, I want to really restrict where it happens.
Okay, so then
more
you would
than
want
I-
the
So
4.
we would have 4 then?
Yeah.
Okay. Or
4 types.
Okay, is that good?
Yeah,
So then,
that answers
all those in favor of rescinding number 5? the
Aye.
zoning?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Melanie moved, Alan seconded, and everyone approved.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we'll have, Juliana, you'll let us know when you can set up a couple days or something for us?
I will, yeah, and so you're tabling item number 7 for the special meeting?
Oh, yes, and so do I need to have somebody make a move to table, or are we just say
I think
table?
just for the record's sake, that may be nice.
And we will go table number 7, the industry license and standards ordinance, until the special meeting that we have.
So I will shoot for 2 weeks from now. I don't know what day or time, but I will work with you guys, and
So
I
do we
will
have
work
to-
with the
Do we
park
have to
bill.
make a motion?
I'm sorry?
Do we have to make a motion?
I
Yeah.
think you're fine with the tabling if everyone's okay. So I will discuss over email with everyone. I will send out some possible dates and times that work with the park building, but we'll shoot for 2 weeks out.
All right,
Try not to make it a Friday. if
thank
can
you
help
for.
it.
I will not make it a Friday or a Saturday.
Let's get it done.
I'm not going to make any promises about Sundays, though.
I don't care about Sunday or
By the way,
Friday.
commissioners, you guys are doing a great job tonight.
All right.
That's what I was just thinking.
Okay,
What a team.
No,
maybe
it is-
more
It
work-
is a great team. This
maybe
is how
more
it works,
work
and you gotta
for our
give and
planner,
take,
but we're
and that's what
doing
we're
a-
doing.
As long as you guys are happy with it, I will do as much work as you want. So,
so now we get to go to number 8, which is the general
Yeah.
plan outreach and engagement strategy, which is probably a lot more fun.
All right. So,
Thank you, everyone that came and gave input.
So, the previous planning commission meeting, we had discussed, and planning commission recommended to the city council to revise the general plan. City council approved, and so we're gonna be moving forward with that. Could you guys cut down on the talking? I'm sorry, I can't hear. Or not, it's okay. All right. Thank you. So we're gonna move into the general plan, so a big, huge portion of the general planning process. So I'm organizing with the Office of Planning and Research some training on the general plan. We're gonna try and partner it with some other projects we have going on. We're gonna do some general plan training. I'm going to be planning at least 2 citywide educational presentation and workshops just to talk about the general planning process as part of our outreach and engagement. So that's gonna be some of our first things we do. But I wanted to open up the discussion here about how we're going to be outreaching to people throughout the whole process, what types of tools we're going to be using to collect data from residents, because it is a huge portion of the general planning process. So some of the outreach tools that we're going to be doing is I'm going to start a general plan portal. So it's going to be its own specific website on the city website page. It'll have all of the information that we're going to be going over, including taping or webinars and things like that. There's probably going to be there's going to be quite a few presentations and workshops related to either general themes or specific themes as we go throughout the next 2-3 years. Webinars, which is the recording of presentations for later viewing or long distance viewers. And then we'll have flyers and education materials that'll just be static documents to help people along. So the main goal is to house a variety of different materials to make sure that we're getting the word out and collecting the input for that general plan process. As far as organizational outreach, attachment number 2 in your packets is a questionnaire that I'm going to be sending out to various organizations in the community. That includes Forest Service, nonprofit organizations, anyone who may be interested or have the ability to partner with us on certain general plan projects. And it has a series of questions asking, what types of items they would be interested in, what types of outreach they're also interested in. So some of the things in attachment 2 on page 54, it'll ask for contact information. Will you be renewing any of your planning documents in the next 3 years, so that if they are, we can coordinate workshops, and then that way we're splitting cost as well as splitting some of the work, going into the common theme of trying not to overwork myself in the process. And then it gives a number of abilities for an organization to commit, or not necessarily commit at this time, but if they're interested in some opportunities about, possibly providing grant writing expertise, reviewing certain portions of the general plan as we go forward, or helping with volunteer data and things like that. So the outreach to organizations is really kind of looking at how we can co-work with other individuals. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. How we can coordinate with other organizations to kind of have co-benefits. So if they're renewing something, we could also renew it. And then the final thing that I included in this for you guys to review is the initial framing surveys. So these are going to be the first surveys that we're going to launch out. We're going to send out postcards as well as stamp water bills to have people try and take the online survey. We're also going to be working with the public library to provide them with some training to help people who may not be familiar with doing online surveys. I have an ability to print all these out as you see to do hard copies, but I would like to stay away from that because it adds to the amount of work I have to do with entering all those in. So the framing survey is it begins on page 57. 57 is that, so it basically is going to be asking some peripheral questions related to, how long have people lived in the city of Mount Shasta, what brought them originally, or if they have ancestors who moved here, if they happen to know the history, to put that in there. If you're not a resident, are you a visitor, a second homeowner, which is like vacation homes or future retirement? neighboring residents. And then it asks some qualitative questions about what's the most positive and negative changes you've seen in the community since you've been living here. What aspects of the city would you preserve for the future? And of those, which do you prize, or which do you feel is most at risk to change? What aspects that you would change for the future? And then has them review our city vision, which normally a city vision on page 60, normally it's a statement, not 4 paragraphs, so it's a little bit of a read, but we would like to get some initial feedback from people as far as what their feeling of that is. Do you feel this really is a vision of the city still? And if it is or is not, some comments on that. And then it basically goes into if they'd be interested in specific topic areas. That helps kind of gauge, the interest areas of the population. And if they'd like to be contacted in the future. That's basically for if we want to do any follow-up surveys. So for example, if someone said they're really, really interested in emerging technology, which I realize here is misspelled. If they're interested in emerging technology, we may follow up with, what are your feelings about internet service in the city? What are your feelings about automated vehicles as far as, having them enter the community? It kind of helps me in the process collect some people who would be interested in those areas to kind of talk about them. And then it goes into demographic information, age, gender identity, how many people reside in your household, and then estimated household income, just for some initial demographics of who's taking the survey. For example, if we happen to be comparing that to census data that we have right now, and we find that for some reason more men than women have been taking the survey, I can go out and try and make sure that they're balanced and look more closer to the demographics we have. So I also included as attachment 1 the general plan guidelines were updated this year. So this is the new community engagement and outreach chapter. You guys can feel free to hold on to that. It has some really good ideas as far as, designing outreach materials and some different ideas from what other cities have done that have worked well. One of the things that I want to focus on right before I open this up for discussion is on page 43. There's a public engagement spectrum. And so it begins with informing, and so I think that's what we're usually used to doing here as far as my area, which is about, this is what's happening, these are the decisions that we made, and it doesn't really engage people nearly as much as I'm hoping to do it. So I have some personal goals for myself and my department as we go through the general plan, and the number 1 goal is to have this general plan not necessarily be just an informing document or just consulting people, but trying to get people more involved in this process to have some more buy-in. I think that's something that I've noticed has been missing from a lot of residents. They've felt a little disconnected. For example, the Alpine feel, they don't really feel connected to that aspect. So I'm trying to, in this next 2-3 years, really get people involved, get people to buy into these types of ideas so that, it's proliferated a little bit more and our percentage of success can go up.
Before I forget, I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to bring in the out-of-city people, because like I represent the out county, and so does Emily, but I sometimes think that they get neglected even though they spend all their money here, or some of their money, not all of it. So that, to make sure we incorporate.
Yeah.
Like women, I think that's really a good point, is to make sure, or, that we have a balance of the sexes.
Yeah, so what I had done, so what I'm going to do as well, so like I said, there's a postcard in addition to a stamp that goes on the water bill. So people who are in the sphere of influence who may not have city water or sewer, what we'll do with those postcards is I can pick specific routes on the postal network and send those sphere of influence individuals the framing survey, and that was the whole point. And not only are we going to do that, but I've also talked with a number of different event holders to have people hoping to get some volunteers to help with it, and I have a few people who would like to basically go out with either an iPad or some sort of technology and basically do live surveys at events. For example, the farmers market, setting up a stall there for the city and saying, hey, we're redoing our general plan. Do you have some time to take this survey related to how you feel about the city of Mount Shasta? That way maybe we're catching some people who don't necessarily live in the sphere of influence even. Some people who may be coming from like Hammond Ranch, which is in our planning area, but not necessarily our sphere of influence. But it does add in here, so the first question is, how long have you lived in the city of Mount Shasta? There's an option, I am not a resident. And then that leads them to the question of, if you are not a resident, please select the option that most represents you. And one of them is neighboring residents, so Dunsmuir, McLeod, Weed, and then county. So hopefully we can try and get some of those sphere of influence individuals into the county portion of that. Obviously that kind of muddles them together. It's really hard to ask someone, are you a sphere of influence resident? Because they are not really sure what those boundaries look like. And I played with putting a map into the survey, but I also didn't want it to be too cumbersome for people to take initially. But as we go through this process, I do aim to go for those individuals. One of the deliverables I hope to have from the general plan process is an annexation timeline and implementation plan as part of the land use element. It's becoming more popular, where it kind of looks at what are the feasible areas to annex in the next few years. So over the course of our planning period, and that really does rely on people who want to be in the city as well. Because when we do go to annex, each property owner does get a vote whether they want to annex or not. And so it becomes much less feasible if you have 90 people in one area of your sphere of influence who really don't want to be part of your city. You wouldn't want to try and annex them at this time. So that kind of addresses that. We're going to be reaching out to them. And and it's going to be really important too, is as we do this, bring those things up. And if there's any ideas that you have, just feel free to share them, to reach out to those people. Because if I might not have thought of something that you two, being outside of the city limits, or you three, I think Paul's the same, to do that. But before you get into discussion, I just wanted to finish with, so one of the internal goals that I have is looking at that public engagement spectrum on page 43. I really want to bring people in and start to collaborate and empower them a lot more with this, just to increase the amount of buy-in, to try and really get a document that people are going to want to follow, which hasn't happened as much in the past. So.
I also like the idea of the portal, because nowadays there's so much more younger people that might go that way, or everybody has some kind of technology that they can. Is that a commentary thing too? Can they comment on the portal? We
can do, yeah. So there are, so the surveying equipment Qualtrics, I can embed it into websites. I can also look at other widgets on our web design format to put in there, where we can house the surveys there and say, have you taken this yet? Or we can, there's a number of different ways we can engage people on that. We could also try discussion boards, if that's something you guys want to do, similar to like Facebook, where you put out there something where you say, here's something that we're considering, or here's a draft version of the vision, and then you can allow people to comment down, and so everyone can see comments. There's pros and cons to anonymous and fully open, obviously. So yeah, there are different ways we can do that to engage people in a number of different formats.
Well, I was thinking as we address each section of the general plan, like if it's transportation or whatever the heck we're doing, it could be a time for people to be able to comment, read it and comment, and not the whole giant thing at one time, but in segments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as we start the framing, we'll kind of just.
Do we have a person that can maintain the website?
The website's pretty easy, and we do have a website designer who helps me quite a bit when I ask for things.
Who's going to read all of these?
Who's going to?
And put all of the data together.
You're going to.
Who's going to collate the data?
So there's a number of different things that I'm looking into. So there's technical assistance that I've been looking into that I mentioned before. I'm also applying to Civic Spark, as well as a few other fellowship programs. So Civic Spark is an AmeriCorps Office of Planning and Research program. It's 2 fellows for 11 months that would come in, and they're a higher level individual, so they're not just people. They're usually master's students or PhD students in different areas. I'm looking into programs like that where they would do most of the data collection, data processing, data analysis, and things like that. The other thing I've looked into that was really successful in some other states is a volunteer corps, is empowering citizens to become their own, go out and take photos of water levels, or go out and record the number of people who've used a trail, basically outsourcing the people who are collecting data. There have been some really great programs that have training materials that make it fairly easy to do. It wouldn't take much time from my end because the materials are already created. And then if people are interested in doing counts and things like that, we can do that. I'm also working with Pacific Crest Trail Association, and then the Forest Service. I've been talking with them about adding, so the kiosks you see with information, adding sections of those that say, hi, if you're on the trail today, please text this number, the number of people and the date. Or there's other ways that you can engage people with technology or GPS systems. You can engage them that way to record data for you. And then that way you just have to go through and quickly process it. There's a number of different models that have already been set up, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Great, okay. Sounds great. I've found that the questionnaires that we receive with the water bill oftentimes get tossed. So having a multiple venues within which people can respond, and I really like the electronic where you can go and fill something out. And I would think that if you have people asking someone down there like downtown farmers market or whatever, having a card that you can give people that shows the website so that they have it and they can put it in their pocket and go fill out the form online and tell them that the questionnaires will be arriving in 2 weeks, so that they'll have different opportunities to fill it out in different ways, either physically or online. And it sounds like you're taking care of those, but I think giving, saying, this is what your opportunity now, and in 2 weeks you'll receive it in your water bill or something like that.
Yeah, we can do press releases as well as, doing some outreach that way too to get people prepared.
It seems like if we publicize this either on television and or the newspaper, something like that, to let them know what's going to be happening in the future. I've done community outlet, I've done projects where we're asking people to come to these meetings, and the first 4 meetings they don't show up to, but the last one we're presenting the plan, that's when people come out.
Yep.
And it's because they've heard about it enough or something. I don't know what it is, but it's extremely frustrating.
Yeah, and I think also with the framing, and again, asking for people with their interest areas as well, when we do start to narrow down the specific topics, we're really not going to speak about the whole plan until towards the end when we start doing the CEQA process. What I really want to do is the framing or the broad stuff and kind of looking at the vision of the city and then breaking it down into each element, or even breaking each element down even further, kind of similar to what we're talking about with transportation, breaking it down to pedestrian, cycling, and things like that, and really getting specific details from people. And I think also outreaching to the organizations that focus on those different areas too will help try and engage those individuals who want to be engaged. So we're going to try a number of different formats throughout, and we will still have workshops, especially if we do urban design for the architectural design guidelines. There's a lot I can do. I can do a lot of design through online formats and stuff like that, but you really do get a lot of information from people coming to an open house and just talking to you about design. But yeah.
So I know there's a couple groups, I use Facebook, and so there's the Clean and Safe Mount Shasta and the Mount Shasta Police Department are both pretty present on Facebook, so I'm wondering if, and even Mount Shasta Trail sometimes is, it may be that we could link onto them and have them push it forward for us, because they have a lot of people that care.
Yeah.
That's kind of where it's at. They might be interested. I don't know. But
I also don't want to detract from the importance of putting it in the newspaper. I have an 80-year-old grandmother who lives in the city of Mount Shasta, and her twin sister lives right next to her. And I know that they always feel like they read the newspaper. They have computers, they don't know how to use them. When I got married, they couldn't figure out my wedding registry. I think that there is an aging community in the city limits. There absolutely is, that needs to be included, especially when we're talking about senior services and the plan, and how we want to take care of that aging community. Because I think the baby boomers definitely use Facebook. Technology's fine, but there's still this older community that feels a little left out. I know with the water discussions, she was like, I just didn't know about this.
Yeah.
So I was involved with the survey that we did for the transportation plan, And we felt like that went pretty well. And, you know, I'm happy to talk to you more about it if you want. A couple points, not in any particular order. Shasta High School, well, all high school students, in order to graduate, need to do community service, so that's a place to tap for volunteers, for help, and even potentially a senior project, but, you know, that's something, certainly the high schools is a good place to go. So, I mean, we use SurveyMonkey, but you said you have another sort of equivalent.
Yeah, Qualtrics is one that I'm really familiar with that I got the city council to basically purchase for me last year, and you can do a lot more with Qualtrics in terms of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a survey. You can also do different types of interactive materials. So I can do heat maps, I can do interactive maps where, for example, if we do an urban design questionnaire or something like that that goes out to emails, you can actually have a streetscape and you can say, can you please click on the top 3 elements that you like of this streetscape? And so, and it'll actually quantify all of that for me and reproduce a heat map where it shows people really like the trees, or people really like brick facades, so I can break it down.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's great.
In terms of groups, I mean, the older communities, Eschaton is certainly, you know, concentrated.
Yeah, the new requirements for the general plan, so each general plan now either has to have an environmental justice element or it has to have environmental justice programmed into each individual element. I think that's the latter is the way I'm looking to go. And that really focuses on aging population, disadvantaged populations as far as, you know, people with disabilities who don't necessarily get engaged nearly as much as people without disabilities, as well as people of low income. So those are the big groups too that if you have any ideas to reach out to those types,
just walk over to Eschaton and hand them the surveys. And we found we had good luck when we actually went to the schools and had the kids take them home.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting, I mean, then you're going out, area of influence, and as far as Hammond Ranch, there's kids.
One group that hasn't been mentioned, and I know usually it's a pain, but I think we should engage the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And then, I mean, I just think, and it's important, you know, a lot of the, you know, the lists, the things you have here, they're kind of one way. You know, presentations are one way. The portal, like you're talking, making it a two-way, you know, surveys seem to be a good way, multiple surveys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this would be just the first one. It sounds like you've got ideas for that.
Yeah, and I think if people pick the specific sectors they're kind of more interested in, it might reduce the amount of survey fatigue too. So that's my biggest concern is as we start surveying, not to over-survey people.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I wonder about, you know, putting, you know, contact information at the end and optional.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's just, and I think there's a little bit of maybe planning jargon in here that could be dialed down in terms of what, or more specific, because I don't think people often understand jurisdictions. For instance, forest management, and I don't know that people are, are we talking about city-owned forest land management? Are we talking public forest management? Those are really different, and I think you need to be a little more specific on those things. That one example, or what is the built environment? What does that mean for somebody who's not familiar with planning? So I would make some changes.
Sure.
To this. I would, right, I think it's a little
More
jargon heavy.
more common language.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think neighboring resident, I'd say neighboring city, you know, one of the neighboring cities as opposed to you know, the area, you know, where in the unincorporated people live. And sometimes people don't even know sometimes, am I in the city or not? The jurisdictions, I think, get really blurry for people sometimes. I found when we did the survey, I really enjoyed people's comments. I think I read them all. It was fascinating what is important to people, because people, they started writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of, you know, who's going to read it, I probably will, given access to it, because
There's like 4,000.
Yeah,
there probably won't be.
So basically, everything except for the contact information would be public knowledge. So I would basically keep these in a spreadsheet.
Pardon me, what I'm not sure of is in the paragraph type information that you provide, how do you quantify it? I mean, it's easy if it's 1, 2, or 3. I choose 3. You know, it's easy to kind of quantify it. But when somebody's writing about how angry they are about the sidewalks or whatever.
We can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so Qualtrics does offer a linguistics analysis, and so it'll go out for, it'll actually count the number of responses using negative words. It'll count out the responses using certain words that you want it to find. So for example, say we get 2,000 responses to this framing question or something like that. And you want to say, you know, how many people, what was the most common word? It'll actually go through each one and find it for you, similar to word clouds, but it'll actually quantify it for you as well. And then it'll even, you can also cross-reference it as well and say, how many people talked about, what was the most common word, and was it talked about and how was it talked about negatively and positively? And it'll break down the number of responses that did. So if they said not
So
something else,
is
it'll
there-
actually do that.
Sorry. Is there a some sort of recognition of handwriting? Do they-
So that's why I said, you know, I'm going to try and stay away from as many paper forms as I can, because then that way I'm going to have to enter them into Qualtrics manually.
Gotcha.
And reading handwriting is not
High school students.
Yeah.
High school community service.
It's
Yeah.
hard to read some people's handwriting. You can't read it and you can't get anything from it.
Yeah, which is why I'm going to be pushing the electronic as much as I can. And the library has been really great. They said, you know, if people do come in wanting paper copies, we can sit with them and assist them. That might be something we'll be doing with volunteers as well. Is if someone does request a hard copy, we could also give them the option of, would you like a hard copy or would you like a site visit by someone to conduct the survey? Because that might help as well. So as much as I can minimize the hard copies, the
Yeah.
better.
Okay.
Like, I like the idea of the site visit for Eschaton. That's actually a really good idea.
Oh, yeah, you gotta walk in there and
Yeah.
do a presentation, and because they tend, we'll talk to Ken, he'll
Yeah.
tell you about how to engage there.
Did you guys have any other suggestions as far as, you know, outreach materials? I mean, thinking about how would you like to be engaged in the process that you might not have heard yet?
I think we're most likely to have people engage with surveys. Most people are there, then, you know, people like Alan said, they're not gonna come to meetings.
Correct.
That's kind of a given. So really, it's gonna be how we can get them to engage.
And if the graphics, that example you pointed out of an image and people can click on those elements that are most important, I think having a survey that grabs somebody right off the bat, because I get quite a few surveys for different things, and I'm almost always, you know, at the end of this call, are you willing to? No. You know, so I mean, we all get those, but having something like that graphic thing that's easy and visceral as a lead, I think would be a way of getting people started.
Also something that is succinct and not too long,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
that can turn people off.
Oh, yeah. Well, but then it's one click.
So in that survey, I noticed, I didn't see anything about really climate change. I mean, there's things like renewable energy, but nothing that actually addresses the climate change issues.
Okay.
Or, I mean, I don't know whether that's appropriate.
Yeah, we can put that in.
I think something along the lines of resiliency and how we want to be a resilient community would be effective.
I agree.
Change with the times,
What?
change with the times, change with the climate.
I guess, yeah. Or, you know, being resilient as the climate changes. We are already doing this, and X, Y, and Z to, you know,
Planning for the,
right. Or what would you like to see us do, X, Y,
Should
and
we
Z?
ask about emergency preparedness?
Yeah, I wrote that down too, because I thought I had put that one in there, but I will make sure that that one is in there. And then the paragraphs in the outreach questionnaire, I'm just going to tweak just a little bit, and there'll be a paragraph at the beginning of the framing questions as well, talking about what we're doing and what's the point of all this and everything like that, and if they want more information. So I can program the ending screen, so when you finish, instead of saying, thank you for taking this survey, the ending screen basically says, thank you for engaging in our survey. Please stay tuned for more. And if you have any comments or questions about it, and it has my contact information. So it'll have contacts at the end and a little bit of an intro.
I just thought of one other thing.
Sure.
Asking them what their biggest resiliency, like what their biggest fears are for the community, and you know, building resiliency. I know that I've talked to quite a few residents that are concerned about wildfire, that kind of thing. So asking something like that, and I know that's kind of hard to put in like
We can do that.
boxes, but just saying like, what's your biggest concern
Mm-hmm.
related to climate change?
Fear-mongers here.
Right, no, but I think it's something that should be considered. I mean, look at the things that are happening. We need to take these things into consideration.
Yeah, so the EPA and FEMA workshop should be in November and December, and we'll wrap those into this as well. Again, yeah, it's tough getting people to go to workshops and stuff, but we're gonna, they're putting out a lot of promotional materials with it too. And so we'll be asking a lot of those questions at those workshops to bring into this as well. But we can add that to, we can add some language to that, to the framing, as far as like interested topics. And I think in the framing, we also have, you know, what aspects of the aspects of the city you prize the most, which of these do you think is the most at risk to change? We can kind of word something similarly about, you know, what things do you fear for, you know, the future as far as natural disasters, emergency situations. We can tweak that.
Okay, so if, is that enough for your, as a commission action?
Yeah, and again, as we go through the process, you guys can feel free to email or contact me between meetings too, if you think of something later, or you happen to talk to someone. For example, a gentleman from Southern California who's a planner came in and talked about something. He and I talked about cannabis for a while. And so if you hear something from a colleague or you hear something else that's out there, feel free to just reach out and let me know, and I can add that.
Okay. All right. Then do we just close this, or?
Yeah.
I'm going to close the general plan outreach and engagement strategy section, and move on to number 9, which is commission and staff comments. Do we have any tonight?
I have a comment.
Okay.
I just want to remind everyone that the Care Fall Woods Tour is October 5th, if there's any interest.
The
we
who,
can
what?
The Care Fall Woods Tour. I discussed it at our last
Right, I
meeting.
remember you brought
Yeah,
something
and we
up.
talk about resiliency, wildlife biology, silviculture, that kind of thing.
And
So
again, when is this?
it's October 5th. It's
What time?
It's a full day. I will be sending out an itinerary to those interested
What day of the
tomorrow.
week
I
is
think I
that,
gave
please?
everybody it's a Thursday.
Thanks.
I gave everybody a flyer when you're gone, but I'll give you my email, and if you're interested, I'll send you a
I don't even know
itinerary.
what it is, so.
We provide transportation and lunch and everything, and if you do need to leave early, it's all in the South County, so you can
Okay.
leave early.
Anyone else tonight?
Well, I was just thinking maybe, Juliana, you might elaborate on that FEMA EPA resiliency piece.
So it is, just writing notes real quick. So the Resiliency Dialogue program that we participated in opened up an opportunity where we were asked to propose our region to an EPA program. So it's a joint EPA and FEMA Section 9, which is our section, program called Building Resilient Communities in California. And so there are new requirements for FEMA in the state of California when it comes to disaster vulnerability assessments and climate vulnerability assessments. And what they're doing now is they're updating their tools and their promotional materials and you know, their best practices to meet those new standards. And so they decided to pick 2 regions in the state of California to basically be example cities to go through it. And, you know, as other cities start to do it, they can look at how other cities interpreted it and some things that came out of it. And so the Mount Shasta region was chosen as one, and the Central Coast of California, Central Coast Climate Coalition, were chosen. And so what that means is EPA is sending up a team, excuse me. They're actually coming up tomorrow from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. to do like an internal staff meeting. If you want to come with, you're more than welcome to join us. We're going to be talking about the overall goals of the program, some things we're going to be accomplishing. This assessment is, again, like I said, required of our local hazard mitigation plan rewrite. It's required for our safety element, and it'll help us in general with the general plan overall. It identifies critical infrastructure, areas that we can improve as a city in our responses to disaster and climate change, and they're doing this free of charge. So it's kind of cool, which is nice.
What time tomorrow?
So it's 1 to 5, and it's in the upstairs police department conference room. It's just the internal stuff right now, so we're just going to be talking about when those workshops are going to be, how we expect those to go, and it's kind of more of how do we set everything up to do this. But you guys are more than welcome to attend if you'd like. I believe the leadership staff, which is all the department heads, and Bruce are going to be there for the first hour or so, and then I'm pretty much doing it with them for the rest of the day, and then I think we're getting dinner after. And then they're going to spend the night here and then go back down to Oakland Thursday. So it's you guys are more than welcome to come and kind of see how it works. And
Is this Cali, PA, or the U.S.?
U.S.
Okay.
U.S. FEMA, U.S. EPA.
Are they going to be the same ones that come up all the time, or is it always going to be a different group?
Nope, it's going to be that team, and then they have a request for proposal out for basically, my understanding, because EPA put out the RFP, is it's a request for consultants to basically help put together these promotional materials and lead the workshops that we're going to be doing. So we're kind of setting up the internal stuff as far as like goals for those workshops and what information we're hoping to get out of them. And I'm working through their draft handbook right now that they want to publish after this is all done. Basically troubleshooting for them and kind of saying, this doesn't work, this does work. Can you elaborate on this? So they'll have that consultant coming up for the workshops as well. So we'll talk about the RFP tomorrow for a little bit, but I think it's only going to be a small portion. So you can get more information on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fun. So.
Anything else? Are we done? Okay, so we'll go on to number 10, the future agenda items.
There's a little typo there on lighting ordinance.
I didn't hear you.
There's a little bit of a typo on the bottom item,
Which one?
The lightning ordinance?
lighting ordinance.
I would like to regulate lightning.
No, it's lighting, and it says 2/20/2017.
Or lighting.
Yeah.
Lighting.
Oh, sorry, it should be
LIGHT,
2018.
lighting.
You know, I
What's that?
saw that when I was typing it, and my brain thought I deleted it. So those are the other ordinances that we have on standby that I hope to finish before we completely get absorbed into the general plan. And again, we're still going to have conditional use permits come up. One of the things I'm working on with John Kenny right now is moratorium language for rezonings and other things in the coming future, because if we're going to be redoing the general plan, it doesn't make sense to make people rezone if they're going to get a new zoning code anyway. So that'll be coming up as well in the next few months. I will also, like I said, I will be in contact with you guys for the cannabis special meeting, so we can go over that. And these are all just tentative dates. You guys can spend as much time on these things as you need to do a good job, and it's the same thing for the cannabis. I wanted to say it earlier, but I guess I can say now, it's a muddy topic because it's all in flux. It's all very new. How things are cataloged is not necessarily how we logically think they should be cataloged.
What are we talking about?
Just the cannabis stuff. I'm not talking substantively about it. I'm just saying I think you guys are doing a good job with it. I would rather have you guys get a product that you want and get something that makes sense to the city, as opposed to, getting it done in a timely fashion. Let me worry about that, which is why I recommend special meetings to make sure they get done on time. I just wanted to say I think you guys are doing a good job taking it cautious and, doing something that's going to be a good product. And like I said, that's the same thing for these upcoming ordinances. I only put them a few months apart because we've worked on pieces of each of them except for the special events permit or ordinance. So if we need more time on any of these, we can always push back dates.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay. 11 is adjournment, and the next regular meeting of the Planning Commission will be October 17th, 2017, with a special meeting before then. Thank you.